Welcome to Reddit Reads r/ProRevenge. Our first Reddit post is from Clunch. Can't you just unload around me? So this happened earlier today and was too perfect to not share with you guys. I work in construction as the foreman for a new house build. The location is kinda strange. The house is 250 feet up a hill via a footpath only. All of our materials have to come up this footpath by hand. It's a pain in the ass to manually carry, quite literally, an entire house up this hill. One of our saving graces is having the 2 parking spots on the street at the bottom of this hill marked with official no parking signs. Unfortunately, there is an elementary school about half a block away, and the parents of children seem to regularly, at least twice a day, think it's okay to park in our spots. Now, I consider myself a reasonable person, so if someone is parked in the spots, and we don't have a delivery or a need to park a truck, I will let it go. If we need the spots and there's someone parked there, however, I will ask them to move nicely, and most of the time, they do so immediately. Until today, I get a phone call from the lumber delivery truck that is en route to our location. He says he'll be there in about 2 or 3 minutes. I let him know I will meet him at the street and make sure he has space to park. As carrying all of the material to frame the roof of our house, which is a lot of really big lumber, and will take easily an hour to bring up the hill. So naturally I didn't want him parked in the middle of the street with his hazards on for an hour. As I begin my trip down the hill, I notice there is a school parent sitting in her car idling. Assuming she's just waiting to pick up her child, I walk up to her car and politely let her know that she is parked in a no parking zone and we really need her to clear it to park a delivery truck. She scoffs at me and rudely states back, "It'll just be a few minutes, and your truck isn't here, take a chill pill, dude." Before I can respond, a giant lumber truck comes around the corner and I wave to him, and then gesture towards him to the woman in the car, who has now put her window back up to ignore me. I put on my best customer service smile and wave at her through the window. She put it down halfway and angrily shouts, "What?" By now the truck has pulled up alongside her car, and I politely ask her again, with a stronger tone of voice, to move her vehicle, reminding her that she is illegally parked in a tow-away zone. Then she gives me this wonderful idea. She says, "Can't you guys just unload around me, Jesus? It's not that hard." I give her another smile and walk away, a brilliant plan forming in my head. I instruct the delivery driver to park as closely to her as possible and block her in with the porta potty that is at one end of our reserved spots, and the parked car that is parked just adjacent to our spots on the other end. He smiles because he immediately gets what I'm trying to do and proceeds to expertly block this lady and her car into a little 2 parking spot jail. We unstrip the lumber and my guys begin humping material up the hill. At this point in time, I wasn't trying to get her in trouble. I just wanted a record of why we were blocking part of the street so we don't get in trouble with the city. The very friendly traffic officer lets me know that she can be there in about 30 minutes and deal with the situation for me. Wonderful. As we continue to unload lumber, the child of the parent shows up. She awkwardly clambers across the inside of her car and stumbles out the passenger door, shooting glaring looks at me and the truck driver in the process. She loads her kid into the back and then begins to realize that she has no way of leaving. She comes storming up to myself. Before I can respond, the driver gets a grin on his face and says, "Mom, in order to unload the lumber on the truck, we had to unstrip it. And per our company policy, I'm not allowed to move the truck with any unsecured load on it. Sorry." This sends her into near aneurysm levels of blood pressure. Meanwhile, I can barely contain my laughter. "Fuck your policy, I have somewhere to be." She barks back at him. At this point, with impeccably convenient timing, the parking enforcement officer shows up and parks behind the truck. She doesn't see the officer arrive, and while the officer is still getting out of her vehicle, I just casually say, "Can't you just pull out around it? It's not that hard." with the biggest shit-eating grin I've ever had. I watch as she realizes that I just used her line on her. "Fuck you." She yells and storms back to her car and angrily clambers back in through the passenger door and into the driver's seat. At this point, the officer is walking up to myself and the driver before she can even introduce herself. The mom in the car slams it into reverse and stomps on the gas, crashing into our porta potty and knocking it over, and then throws the car into drive and tries to mount the curb and drive on the sidewalk. The officer, driver, and I are staring in disbelief as she gets halfway over the curb and gets stuck. I can hear her screaming obscenities over the idling truck from inside her car. The officer promptly walks up to the door of the car and orders her out. My favorite part of the entire thing is watching her face go to shock as she realized she just did all of that in front of a police officer. She gets slapped in cuffs as the parking officer calls for a second unit, and she is promptly sat on the very curb she tried to drive over. She sits on the curb yelling to the now two officers about how we told her she could stay there and that we never asked her to move. The traffic officer responds that she was the one who was originally called when she first refused to move and that she already knows what's going on. While myself and the driver are giving a report to the second officer, my guys finish moving the remainder of the lumber, and the driver finishes his statement and takes off to go back to the yard. By the end of the ordeal, she was arrested, charged with child endangerment. Her kid was in the back of the car the whole time, reckless driving, destruction of property, the porta potty, and driving on a suspended license. On top of all that, she also got her car towed. The kid went home with his grandma, and she went to spend some quality time in a cell. I never expected her to actually heed my advice to just pull out around it. But I think next time she'll probably think twice about parking in a tow-away zone if she ever gets a license again. TLD, a rude lady parks in construction site reserved parking, asks us to unload around her, so we park blocking her to do so, gets mad when she now has no way out, crashes into our porta potty, and tries to mount the sidewalk, gets stuck, and the arrested by an officer who was on scene, and all with her child in the back seat. This comment is from Tyrannosaurus Rocks. It is always so painful to read about people slowly making worse and worse decisions. Basically every step of the way she was able to acknowledge her bad decision and take her small retribution, but she kept making it worse and worse. Is it wrong for me not to be surprised at all that she had a suspended license? It seems to go with that type of person. This comment is from Nisexjunk. The suspended license was the best part for me. Everyone knows if you're riding dirty, you keep your head down and obey traffic laws. This comment is from Pilsis74. If this school is anything like my kids, they've sent email upon email and letter upon letter home to tell people not to park in these spots. My kids' school has a curb in front with a ton of no parking from 84 signs out there. There's a drop-off point literally at the next right, and it's still amazing how many people still ignore them. You may actually want to let the school know about these spots. Now, a word from today's sponsor. Make sure to donate to my Patreon down in the description below to get early access to videos, participate in special patron-only events, and other goodies. Any amount of money is greatly appreciated. It makes it easier for me to make the content that I love making, and I know you guys love too. Now back to the video. Our next Reddit post is from Rocky Moose. Landlord is jealous of my income, raises my rent 500. I screw him years later for 20. TLDR is the same as the title. Landlord is jealous of my income. I screw him years later for 20. All names have been changed. In the late 90s, wife and I were just married, just getting started, and we decided to dink double income. No kids it for a few years to save up for a down payment on a house. The dot-com bubble was still rising and I was a newly minted software developer. I had an entry-level job for a while and then got recruited to a new city and a new job that paid threes what I was making before. It was an offer too good to pass up. I ran the numbers, and it was a no-brainer. By living frugally and saving my entire salary, living off just her income. We rented an apartment in the new city that was listed for 950mo. The landlord was a real estate agent who owned a 12-room condo as an investment property. Let's call him Hank Wazowski. Hank was a thin, gray, Nininsen's guy. He was pleasant enough, but perfunctory, dry, and had no sense of humor. He made a point of explaining that under no circumstances was he responsible for maintaining the garbage disposal, and that it was not included in the rental agreement, and he would not be responsible for fixing it were it to break. Oak. He seemed slightly amused by us, a clueless, young newlywed couple, but I could tell he wanted to rent to us because we were very obviously a safe choice as renters. We filled out the rental agreement and the credit check, and this is where my troubles began. Hank looked hard at the credit application where I listed my job title, software developer, and my income 75th. For a 23-year-old in his second year out of college in the late 1990s, this is a small fortune. Throw in my wife's salary, and we were over 6 figures in income, renting an apartment far beneath our means. Like I said, Dink is the way to go when starting out. I can't believe how much money you make, Hank must have said half a dozen times, muttering under his breath. I explained we were saving to buy a house, and that we were only going to stay in the apartment a year. We might stay a few months after the term is over. Would month to month be oak after a year? Hank assured us that would be fine. We saw Hank only once during the year, and he again mentioned my salary and how he can't believe that's what software developers were making. It was awkward, and I gave a vague reply. Anyway, a year later, we had found a house to buy, signed all the papers, and were making plans to move. The new house wasn't going to be ready until 2 months after our rental lease was up. Hank assured me on the phone it would be no problem, and he would send over an extension for us to sign. The extension arrived in the mail, and it included a month-to-month clause and a $500 increase in the rent. I flipped out and called him. "Hank, why are you increasing the rent over 50? That's too much. That's more than my new mortgage is going to be." He was super condescending to me. "Rocky Muse, it's what the apartment goes for now. I would be losing money by renting it for less." I tried to reason with him, but it was very clear he knew we could afford the $500, had no choice in the matter, and he was going to screw us over as best he could. He got angry with me for arguing my point, and I'll never forget his parting words. "You don't have to like it, Rocky Muse, you just have to pay it." My wife and I tried to figure out a way to move out early by putting our furniture in storage for a couple months and crashing with friends, but it just wasn't going to work out. I swallowed my pride and wrote out the check for $14.50 for the extra month. A month later, I wrote a similar check, and then we moved out. I made sure the apartment was spotless before moving, but still Hank withheld $300 from our security deposit for bullshit things that were just a way for him to squeeze a few more dollars from the kids who made too much money. $100 for cleaning, sure, but $300 was obscene. In my mind, he had screwed me over for $1,200, and there was nothing I could do about it. What made it even more infuriating is that I saw the ad Hank put in the paper after we moved out, and he listed the apartment for rent at only $150 more than we had been paying originally, not the grisly inflate $500 increase. And it didn't rent. A month later, I saw the same ad, and he had lowered the price to $75 more than we had been paying, and I assume it got rented since the ads stopped appearing. Fast forward about 5 years. Life is good, the house is good, we have a baby, and even though the dot-com bubble has burst, I'm still employed. One day, out of the blue, I overhear one of my coworkers, Phil, a senior developer, talking to the guy working the reception desk. "Hey Mike, I'm expecting someone to drop off some paperwork for me. If a Hank Wazowski asks for me, tell him I'll be right out." I freeze and get a taste of bile in my mouth, remembering how I had to write out that name on those checks all those years ago. There's no way it's the same guy, right? I walk over to Phil, who is still by the reception desk. Phil, I say, how do you know that name, Hank Wazowski? Phil explains that Hank is his real estate agent. I bought my condo through him several years ago. I'm selling my condo now so I can buy a house. So I'm going to ask him to be my agent again. Do you know him? I tell Phil that I used to rent an apartment from Hank and described what he looks like. Phil confirms the description, it's the same guy. Wow, small world, right? And on cue, right then the front door to the office opens and in walks Hank Wazowski. I stare in disbelief, as carrying a folder of papers, and doesn't recognize me. Phil and Hank shake hands, and they talk for a few moments. I stand there silently, wondering what to do. Phil finally says, Hank, this is my friend Rocky News. I think you may have already met. Yes, hello Hank. Good to see you again. My wife and I were your tenants a few years ago on street. Remember the software developer who rented for a year saving to buy a house? Well, this is where I work. Here, with Phil. Hank's eyes indicate he now remembers me and is starting to put it all together. We shake hands, and he says yes, of course he remembers, and asks how we are doing. Oh, we're just fine, thanks for asking. Phil says that you're his real estate agent. Small world, isn't it? Hank nods pleasantly. He still doesn't remember the details of our last conversation. I do some quick math in my head. This is the early mid-2000s. The real estate market is very strong and easy money for any agent. The crash of 2008 is still a few years in the future. I start to think out loud. Selling the condo for around $150,000 to $200,000, and you're looking at houses in the $500,000 range, so that's $650,000 to $700,000 in total transactions. An agent getting 3 on the sale, and the purchase is getting around 20 for his trouble. That's a good commission for the agent, isn't it? Hank's eyes flash, and I can tell he remembers everything about me now. Phil is surprised at my passive-aggressive tone. I am enjoying the uncomfortable silence. Hank deflects my question, saying it's complicated, and tells Phil to send back the papers as soon as possible. He shakes hands with Phil, looks at me, nods, and goes to leave. It was really good to see you again, Hank. I call behind him. He exits the building. As the door is still shutting, I say a bit too loudly so that Hank can hear, Phil, don't sign anything just yet. I have a story to tell you. Phil looks at me and says, Rocky, what the hell was that all about? He looks pissed and confused at my behavior. I tell Phil the whole story, the rent, the $500 increase, the security deposit. You don't have to like it, you just have to pay it, everything. Phil, you can't use this guy to sell your condo and buy a house. I hate him as evil. I'll help you find another real estate agent. Just use anyone but Hank. So the great thing about Phil is that, well, he's a great guy. He says, a little surprised at my story, and has always known Hank as a straightforward guy. But I totally see him doing that to you, he admits. There's no way I could use him now. What a dick. Then Phil's eyes lit up a bit. What do you want me to say when I fire him? I have special feelings for Phil now. We came up with a plan, and I made sure there were some key phrases in Phil's repertoire. We planned it all out together in advance. My only regret is that I didn't get to see Hank's reaction in person a day later when Phil made the following phone call while I stood behind him listening. Hi Hank, it's Phil calling. Yeah, about that. I've decided to get some other quotes from other agents. I'm not going to sign up with you. Pause, pause, pause. No, you shan't give a discount. You'd be losing money if you did that. No, this is just a decision I've made. No, it has nothing to do with Rocky News. Well, you don't have to like it, Hank. You just have to accept it. Goodbye. Click. And it was the greatest revenge I could have ever imagined. Through a chance meeting years later, Hank got screwed out of $20,000 in easy commissions. And the best part is Hank absolutely knew it had everything to do with Rocky News. This comment is from Lausiarm. This is so satisfying. I feel like it's everyone's bad landlord fantasy. This comment is from Six Fortwo. The only question I have is, how did you manage to walk around the office with a huge justice boner for the rest of the day without offending anyone? This comment is from Rocky News. I stumbled upon this subreddit a few days ago and said Justice Boner has been repopping ever since in anticipation of writing down this story. So glad I got to share it. That was Reddit Reads r/ProRevenge. If you like this content, please subscribe and click the bell icon so you are notified of new uploads. We upload new videos every day. Also subscribe to our Patreon, as that will help us a lot. See you next time.